Okay, it's 12:30. We'll get started. So welcome everyone to a Center Austria talk by Dr. Susan McClamroch. We are very happy to have Susan come to us from Huntsville, Alabama, to tell us about Wernher von Braun and how he is being perceived in Huntsville, Alabama, where of course much of his illustrious career unfolded. But I'm not going to steal the fire from Susan. I just want to briefly introduce her. She is currently the registrar at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama. And prior to that, she was on the staff of the Tennessee Historical Commission, where she had a lot to do with the removal of statues, Civil War statues. So essentially, the issue of public memory is something that she has worked with for a long time. Now, I know Susan because she just finished her PhD at the University of New Orleans in the Urban Studies program, and I was advising it. This has been a multi-year effort, as anybody who's worked on a PhD thesis knows. Susan came with sort of some vague ideas that she wanted to work on Huntsville and Wernher von Braun, but then in the process, we developed the topic. We did a summer-long reading also about Wernher von Braun's Nazi past. That was sort of news to her. And of course, that Nazi past is very much part of her consideration about Wernher von Braun, the famous rocketeer. Now, Susan has a lot of degrees, prior degrees to her PhD. There's a BA from a small college in Mobile, Alabama. What's the name of it again, Susan?
Spring Hill College.
Spring Hill College, yeah. How could I forget that? Spring Hill College. And then she has 2 master's degrees from the University of Mississippi, of which one is in art history. And she has a master's degree from Tulane University. I think that's in historic preservation. So she is sort of all over the place in terms of her skills and knowledge about the public image and memory of people like Wernher von Braun. So with any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Susan, and she's going to give us a 45-minute presentation and then open up the space for some questions. And by the way, everybody, we are recording this meeting just because other people who can't make the talk today would like to see it. So I hope that's okay with you. Just that you're all aware of it. So Susan, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
And thank you, Dr. Bischoff. Thanks for the opportunity to share my dissertation research and also to explain the intersection between this academic investigation and my professional work. For the past 2 years, 2.5 years, I have served as administrator of the Tennessee Heritage Protection Act. It is a state law designed to make the removal of Confederate monuments difficult. Alabama is among those southern states that scrambled to pass such laws as what is commonly called cancel culture began to pick up steam. However, Alabama's law did not prevent the relocation of Huntsville's Courthouse Lawn Confederate Monument in 2020. It merely prompted litigation. And you see now all the steps to the removal of the monument in 2020. Because my job in Tennessee required monitoring public opinion regarding Confederate monument removal, I was not terribly surprised to find comments calling for the removal of a bust honoring Huntsville, Alabama's hometown hero, Dr. Wernher von Braun. Not because he was one of the American South's Confederate heroes, of course, but because he had been a German Nazi during World War II. This is the monument that the most commenters were referring to. It is the only sculpted image of von Braun in the Huntsville landscape. Because it is located on a military base, it is not easily accessible and is primarily viewed by those who work in the nation's spaceflight industry and missile defense. Yet, Tour buses took U.S. Space and Rocket Center visitors to Marshall Space Flight Center and to view the bus on a daily basis before the COVID pandemic. No doubt the tours will resume, and viewers from across the nation and abroad will again gaze at this futuristic portrayal of America's famed German rocket scientists. Dr. von Braun and the team he brought to the United States from Peenemünde, Germany, the facility where rockets were developed for Adolf Hitler during World War II, are credited for a series of spaceflight successes that positioned Huntsville for a brilliant future in the global spacefaring industry. Huntsville boosters were more than happy to rebrand the North Alabama community as Rocket City, and Peenemünde boosters were more than happy to stake a claim as the place where their rocket building work started. Note the little sign on the roadway in Peenemünde calling the military facility there and the town community, partner community to Huntsville. Prior to the space industry, Huntsville economy was primarily based in cotton growing and milling. Both are mired in a legacy of labor abuses that caught the attention of abolitionists and labor reformers through the years. By the 1920s, Huntsville was firmly established as Alabama's textile center, but wages in the city's northern-owned mills remained low for the influx of workers who left farms to work in town. Women received less pay than men, but girls often working as spinners tended to earn more than boys. Regardless of position, southern mill workers earned on average 4 times less than their counterparts in northern mills. Pay in Alabama mills was even lower than in other southern states, forcing entire families to work for a meager family wage. Huntsville's one industry economy spiraled downward during the Depression. In 1938, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared the entire South the nation's top economic program, with half the per capita income of the rest of the nation. New Deal programs exposed labor abuses, revealing that 3/4 of the nation's child laborers were at work in the South. The Roosevelt administration believed only the federal government could rectify this national disaster and put an end to the cycle that had created the South's shameful colonial condition. Federal providence returned to the region in the form of the Tennessee Valley Authority, known as TVA. Signed in 1933, the TVA created a public corporation to address the region's economic, energy, and environmental stewardship issues. The TVA constructed dams, harnessed hydroelectric power, and manufactured fertilizer. And in 1940, as the nation mobilized for a Second World War, TVA's second chairman tried to insert the public corporation in defense-related activities. However, his efforts faltered due to the lack of suitable facilities for constructing contractual government work and the shortage of managers and skilled laborers. As American involvement in the conflict intensified, the US government stepped in. They plowed military bases out of old plantation land across what came to be known as the American Sun Belt. Over time, nearly 2/3 of the nation's domestic Army and Navy bases settled in the South, as the rebellious region that once took up arms against the federal government embraced what has been called the military payroll complex. In 1941, when Army officials decided that the chemical weapons plant in Maryland could not meet demand if the Germans produced the quantity of nerve agents that they had in the First World War, Congress approved funds for a second facility. John J. Sparkman, Huntsville lawyer and congressman since 1936, is credited for urging the United States Chemical Weapons Service to choose a former plantation site in Madison County, Alabama. Alabama's senior senator, Lister Hill, is credited with getting William Porter promoted to Major General and appointed Chief of the Chemical Warfare Service prior to Porter's role in selecting the site of the new plant. Politics aside, geography sold the War Department on the arsenal location. For $65 per acre, the Army acquired 40,000 acres near the TVA with rail connections to the east and west coast and access to the Gulf of Mexico via the Tennessee River. Ultimately, two facilities were constructed. The first, a chemical weapons plant, was named Huntsville Arsenal. The second, called the Redstone Ordnance Plant, manufactured conventional munitions and artillery shells for the Ordnance Department. Over 10,000 civilians worked at the arsenals until 1945, when the Army Chemical Corps put Huntsville Arsenal up for sale as surplus property. Even before the war ended, community leaders realized that the Chamber of Commerce could not handle the needed industrial recruitment and established the Huntsville Industrial Expansion Committee in 1944. In his role as chairman of this committee, and now as U.S. Senator as of 1948, John Sparkman again played an influential role at this site, persuading the Army to consolidate its new missile and rocket research efforts and relocate to Huntsville. In 1949, U.S. Army General Holger Tuftoy gained approval to purchase both arsenal sites and combine them into one site called Redstone Arsenal. Then in 1950, he transferred a portion of Adolf Hitler's former rocket development team, led by Dr. Wernher von Braun, to work in Huntsville. The transfer included an Army Technical Service unit that had provided military support to the von Braun team since 1945, when the Germans began sharing their technological expertise with the U.S. Army at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. The image that you see is the 1835 Oakendale Plantation, which was once located on land that is now Redstone Arsenal. It was named the Mannered Godding House on the military base, moved a few times, altered, used for Redstone use, and finally demolished in 2016. After the 1957 Sputnik scare, the 1958 celebration of the successful launch of the first American satellite, Explorer 1, propelled into orbit by a rocket produced in Huntsville, made a Cold War hero of Wernher von Braun. In the 1950s and 1960s, Cold War rocket development at Redstone Arsenal garnered national media attention and made household names of the two generals in charge, and made a celebrity of Wernher von Braun. Medeiros appeared on NBC's Meet the Press twice and was broadcast from Redstone Arsenal on Edward R. Murrow's Person to Person. And Tuftoy was interviewed by Mike Wallace of CBS and appeared on This Is Your Life television show. Von Braun was featured in a series of Wonderful World of Walt Disney broadcasts and a series of Collier's magazine articles about space exploration, each identifying the German with a Huntsville, Alabama byline. As the United States and Russia engaged in the Cold War's heated space race, von Braun continued to garner national and international media coverage, all in reference to his rocket building successes in Huntsville. Yet, there we go. Von Braun's legacy has been haunted by the European memory that migrated with the German team to America at the end of World War II. On November 17th, 1998, Michael J. Neufeld, as author and curator of World War II history at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., gave his first public address in Huntsville at the University of Alabama, Huntsville's Fall History Forum. The press release for the event stated that the historian would discuss the available evidence regarding von Braun's political behavior, using images from key documents, and placing those documents in context with the behavior of ordinary Germans in the Third Reich. Martin Berkey's report of the event was published in the Huntsville Times the following day. Saying that Neufeld knew he was playing to a tough audience, Berkey explained that some in the crowd of about 200 had worked for von Braun in Huntsville, and a few were Peenemunders. According to Berkey, Neufeld showed wartime photos and documents to prove that von Braun did nothing to stop or protest the use of concentration camp slave labor for V-2 rocket production. Admitting that the evidence was sketchy and rocket production decisions were not von Braun's, Neufeld concluded the talk saying that von Braun had a moral responsibility, whether he had a legal responsibility or not. The bottom line, Neufeld said, is that a black and white depiction of von Braun is wrong. The Huntsville Times published a follow-up article a few days later. This time, Martin Berkey focused on reactions from the audience who heard Neufeld say that von Braun bore greater responsibility for what he did not do than the average German because of his prominent position. Berkey reported that von Braun's supporters were shocked at the notion of blaming the rocketeer for something he possibly could not do. The journalist included his own reaction, calling the speaker arrogant for declaring what he would have done in von Braun's situation. Although the history department at UAH encouraged discussion on these issues, the university administration remained focused on honoring von Braun in 2000 by naming a research hall after the space pioneer. Also in honor of the 50th anniversary of the von Braun team's arrival at Redstone Arsenal, UAH hosted an exhibit created by the US Army. On the advice of his friend Michael Neufeld, photographer Al Gillens made plans to detour through Huntsville on his way to Pennsylvania from winter holiday in Florida and view the exhibit titled Von Braun and the US Army Laying the Foundation of America's Space Program. He arrived too late to see the show on display, but was treated to a private showing of the items that had not yet been packed for support. While there, Gillens offered to provide V-2 related photographs that he shot in Germany in 1994 for a future exhibition at UAH. Stephen Waring, chair of UAH's history department, was indeed interested in showing Gillens haunting images of the Dora tunnels in pre-museum ruins and formed an exhibit committee that included the German language professor, the college's sociology department head, as well as art professors and chair of the school's art department. Since administrative censorship was a concern for this event, gaining the support of multiple departments, which also brought in funding from multiple departments, was a shrewd move to ensure academic freedom. The initial photography exhibit idea expanded to include history programming, and plans were made to bring in Torsten Hess, chief curator of the recently established Mittelbau Dora Memorial, located near Nordhausen, and bring him to Huntsville and to ship artifacts from the site's collection to display with Gillens' photographs. The press release published in the Huntsville Times promoted one morning and one afternoon public talk by Gillens and Hess to accompany the 2001 exhibit at the UAH Art and Art History Department's Union Grove Gallery. After sharing the silent story of slave labor V-2 production, Hess said, Mittelbau Dora remains a place like any other, where degradation on one hand and advanced technological achievement on the other hand turned it into an eloquent 20th century example of the relationship between scientific technological progress and man's inhumanity to man. The link between space travel and Mittelbau Dora, Hess said, cannot be overlooked. The exhibit, titled Images of Dora, Discovery and Despair, was reviewed in the Decatur Daily. The article explained that Gillens had been photographing concentration campsites across Germany since the early 1970s, and noted that the Huntsville exhibition audience included Ernest and Hilda Nathan, who both survived other concentration camps. Nathan, a 35-year NASA retiree, expressed enthusiasm for the UAH event that had exposed the rarely mentioned history of 60,000 war slaves who assembled V-2 rockets in horrendous conditions in underground tunnels, and the 20,000 who died there. UAH professor Stephen Waring was quoted saying that in Huntsville, it's a story that's not talked about, but talked around. After the exhibit was dismantled, Waring sent a follow-up email to Gillens. He reported that, although not directly to him, UAH president had expressed his displeasure and wished that the exhibit had been held elsewhere. Waring also reported that, in an ironic twist, von Braun's former public relations person, who had also been the inaugural and longtime director of the U.S. Space and Rocket Center, defended the exhibit to the university president, justifying it as academic freedom. Waring stated that this was probably the best attended exhibit in UAH history. Students working in the gallery said that more than one person came back repeatedly, often with a friend or two in tow. Waring also relayed that he led a tour of public relations staff members from Redstone Arsenal, who were, quote, surprisingly eager to learn Dora history. Neufeld returned to Huntsville in 2008 after the 2007 publication of von Braun, Dreamer of Space, Engineer of War. Now chair of the Space History Division at the National Air and Space Museum, he appeared on the UAH campus to deliver 2 talks as Humanities Center short-term eminent scholar, sponsored again by the History Department. The first, an evening lecture, was titled after his biography on von Braun, and the second, a morning lecture, was titled Space Hero or Nazi Villain, Wernher von Braun as Cold War Icon. The Huntsville Times covered Neufeld's visit, saying Neufeld has been about as popular as Lyme disease since he began chiseling away at the popular Disney image of von Braun in his book, The Rocket and the Reich. Now he's back with von Braun, Dreamer of Space, Engineer of War, and his big subject remains the same, putting von Braun in some kind of box that will hold both his World War II rocket work for the Nazis and his post-war rocket work for America in Huntsville. In the halls of UAH, Neufeld called von Braun ancient history that was becoming forgotten, to which the Huntsville Times reporter responded, if von Braun is truly being forgotten, he'll be forgotten last here. It was Neufeld's relationship to La Copule that prompted Molly Johnson, associate professor of history at UAH, to contact Yves Lemeneur, professor of modern history at the University of Paris and director of the recently opened museum in France, and inquire about borrowing an exhibit of prisoner drawings and photographs that Neufeld told her about. With an overwhelmingly positive response, Lemeneur offered to transfer the photo and text files electronically and pro bono instead of incurring great expense to ship a physical exhibit. The Department of History's plan to host an exhibit of photos and drawings from France expanded into a multi-department public programming project called Dora and the V2, Slave Labor in the Space Age, with tasks for students in the school's public history, website design, and photography classes to perform. Other departments were brought on board for public programming, most notably theater, music, philosophy, and German language. The event was set for February-March of 2010 to give the Liberal Arts Division time to obtain grant funding that would cover costs for a major public history event at UAH. UAH historians wanted to include some of the Mittelbau Dora memorial artifacts that had been shown in 2001. Since the objects were still in US storage under Al Gillen's care, Correspondence with the photographer led to discovering that the Middelbau Dora Memorial had recently developed an English language traveling exhibition. Early in the 2010 spring semester, Dora and the V2 slave labor in the space age exhibit goers were greeted by huge banners hung in the foyer of the M. Lewis Salmon Library building. The title banner, Forced Labor for the Final Victory, Middelbau Dora Concentration Camp, 1943 through 1945, announced that a foreign presence had invaded the library. In bold lettering, labor was spelt with the U that the British use and the Americans omit, marking the banner as an import. In smaller print, the Buchenwald and Middelbau Dora Memorial Foundation was given credit for the display. Those who chose to make the exhibit a destination were somewhat prepared for an unpleasant excursion into aspects of Huntsville's transnational past. But for regular library patrons, the unexpected encounter could have been a bit disturbing. 27 banners, arranged chronologically from the establishment of the Dora concentration camp to its dissolution and beyond, confronted all who entered this normally benign space. The banners presented biographies of camp inmates, survivor memories, and details about camp administrators. But the impetus for bringing them to the United States was located in the section labeled the perpetrators. There, one banner, and I will point your attention to the very last banner and the figure on the left half of the banner, so you only see half of the face of Wernher von Braun. This banner was devoted to making a negative connection between Middelbau Dora and Huntsville's famed rocket engineer. For exhibit goers, there was no avoiding an encounter with this damning proclamation. The banner had been strategically placed in a corridor leading to the library's gallery space where the bulk of the exhibit was located. The scale of items on display in the gallery was much smaller. On entering this space, the orderly hung and neatly labeled framed images appeared quite civilized. Closer inspection proves the depicted scenes were quite uncivilized, except for a series of industrial efficiency photographs commissioned by Albert Speer and shot by Walter Frenz. Exhibit text explains that as Minister of Munitions and a key backer of the V2 weapons program, Speer had hired Frenz, Adolf Hitler's personal photographer, to make film and still photos of the missile assembly line in the underground factory for a confidential progress report. The session took place on the Sunday before V2 production went into full operation, with healthy, decently clothed deportees who had recently arrived at Dora. The photo shoot took place at the world's largest underground factory, with 97,000 square meters of facility in a complex comprised of 2 parallel tunnels linked by galleries. There, a state-run company called Middelwerk assembled V2 rockets. Exhibit visitors read that plant administrators were either engineers from Peenemünde or from large private firms, as captions confirmed the accuracy of the various stages of rocket assembly shown in Frenz's photos, and acknowledged his ability to relay the complexities of rocket production in this immense factory. Existence of these photos was not publicly known until 1998, when the photographer's son discovered the negatives in a trunk and made the images available to La Copule in honor of the Dora deportees. The UAH display included a self-portrait of the photographer standing behind his camera in the underground site, as if to prove that he too had actually been in this unbelievable space. Nearly all the prisoners documented in this rare collection of color photos from Dora are French. Some of the photographed prisoners have been identified by survivors, attesting to the authenticity of this propaganda documentation. Designed to promote a specific industry and its industrious use of concentration camp labor, Frientz's photos have evolved from stage scenes that took advantage of captive models to documents proving that photographed individuals had been Dora inmates. Now they are a form of preservation that perpetuates camp celebrity status for the men caught on film. Reportedly, among others identified, Leon Navarro, the only prisoner looking at Frientz's camera in this book cover, as you see, recognized himself 55 years after the photo was shot. Frientz's imagery, initiated in the service of German memory, has been appropriated by French memory as an aspect of French resistance heritage and is permanently on display at La Copule. As displayed at La Copule, you see Frientz's photos on the right, large prints of them, and large reproductions of slave art drawings by Dora prisoners on the left. Small reproductions of this gruesome and disturbing, quote, slave art were displayed in Huntsville. Following his death in 2008, the university archives acquired World War II photographs shot by John Ryson Jones, one of the Dora concentration camp liberators. Jones was a fifth-generation Huntsvillian. He graduated from Huntsville High School and attended Alabama Polytech Institute, which is now Auburn University, where he enlisted in the U.S. Army on December 7th, 1942. He served as a private first class in Company L, 414th Regiment, 104th Timberwolf Infantry Division in the European Theater. After the war, Jones obtained a doctorate in modern European history from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He taught at Washington and Lee University and Southern Methodist University before joining Sergeant Shriver's Office of Economic Opportunity to develop the Upward Bound program for disadvantaged youth. 15 photos from a scrapbook he created after the war were shown in the exhibit at UAH. The genre of concentration camp imagery made at the time of liberation was called World War II atrocity photos by post-war critics. This body of documentary imagery, shot by professionals, soldiers, and civilian photographers, has been an invaluable witness for interpreting events and transmitting testimony to future generations. Over time, soldier-made photos have accounted for nearly half of all liberation images published in U.S. newspapers, books, and journals. Over a 3-week period in April and May of 1945, atrocity photos were published by media outlets in the US and UK to convince a disbelieving public that what the liberating forces were seeing was real. They were put to work again when the post-war denazification campaign required the German population to view atrocity photos and documentary film footage. This post-war exhibiting program ushered in a second generation of atrocity photos when photos of people looking at atrocity photos for denazification purposes were published. The goal of the UAH History Department's public programming was to tell the untold story of V2 production at Dora and to temper the heroic von Braun talk in Huntsville. It is significant that this campaign to change public opinion and forms of public commemoration concerning von Braun took place in an academic setting, one that had been strongly supported by von Braun. It is also significant that the campaign was launched with Michael Neufeld's first UAH lecture in 1998. In communication with me, Neufeld expressed solidarity with the UAH History Department, but disappointment in other Huntsville institutions that he says trace their origins to the von Braun team, rightly or wrongly. It's highly likely that he was referring to the US Space and Rocket Center, an institution that deserves more in-depth study than the scope of this one allowed. The question is, did the historians achieve their goal? And the answer is yes and no. There's enough evidence to declare their effort to break the silence on von Braun's Nazi membership and involvement in slave labor at Dora a success. As Neufeld pointed out, his previously, quote, boycotted books on von Braun are now sold at the US Space and Rocket Center's bookstore, even though this exhibiting and archiving institution still omits the Nazi and slave labor aspects of the Rocketeer's World War II history from its public programming. As for the effort to knock von Braun off the town hero pedestal, the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing in 2019 provided an appropriate test for changes in commemorative attitudes toward Huntsville's favorite German. In 1969, with a global television audience of over 500 million viewers, live coverage of the moon landing made it the most vicarious event in world history. At that time, all eyes were on astronaut heroes, not NASA's German engineers and technicians, and the villains were Russians. In 2019, Russian cosmonauts were now good guys, even if their government's a bit questionable. The Chinese are now players in the game, and American astronauts are still heroes. But the leader of NASA's German team was treated like a villain, except in Huntsville, where in 2019, the US Army at Redstone Arsenal County Labor Force, where in 2019, the US Army at Redstone Arsenal and NASA at Marshall Space Flight Center were the two largest employers, with approximately 40% of the county's labor force employed by the federal government and 80,000 civilians working for aerospace and defense contractors. Neil Armstrong's moon landing quote was repeated everywhere and debated in 2019. Did he say, "That's one step for man, one giant leap for mankind," or did he say, "One small step for a man"? In Huntsville, that quote was accompanied by another from Wernher von Braun. On the occasion of his move to NASA headquarters in 1970, Huntsville hosted a farewell event on the Madison County Courthouse Square, where von Braun stood under a huge banner identifying him as, quote, Dr. Wernher von Braun, Huntsville's first citizen on loan to Washington, D.C., end quote. There he told the assembled crowd, "My friends, they were dancing here in the streets of Huntsville when our first satellite orbited the Earth. They were dancing again when the first Americans landed on the moon. I'd like to ask you, don't hang up your dancing slippers." The 2019 celebration included a street dance, complete with a multimedia show projected on the same structure that served as the background for this now iconic photo of von Braun riding the shoulders of men carrying him to the courthouse stairs for the city's Apollo 11 splashdown celebration on July 24th, 1969. In 2019, von Braun's voice and German accent still resonated with the crowd as it was broadcasted, and they cheered, and his call to hang on to their dancing slippers reverberated through the downtown streets of Huntsville. In the commemoration category, the historian's effort seems to have had little effect. The city's 2019 celebration was not muffled by the previous decade's Faustian bargain and Dora revelations at UAH. However, most national celebrations of the moon landing's 50th anniversary either omitted the German engineer from the story or portrayed him in the deal with the devil terms that Neufeld used to describe von Braun's work for Adolf Hitler.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. McClamroch, for a fascinating talk. And if we just look at what was said, in fact, I think the introduction was more complete than a dissertation, the early history of Huntsville. as a cotton town. But I think particularly you worked out very nicely what you call the commemorative attitudes that are coexisting in Huntsville. On the one hand, the university, the academic community wanting to include von Braun's history in Nazi Germany and the fact that he worked in Dora Mittelbau using slave labor, which later he tried to sort of deny. And on the other hand, of course, the Huntsville public memory, which is lionizing von Braun as a great hero of the town because he developed the Apollo rocket and he brought fame to Huntsville, and of course, not only fame, but a lot of employment for the people there.
Yes.
So I think it's a fascinating story, no matter how you look at it. And I think you've worked out that compromise very nicely, culminating in the 219 50th anniversary of the Apollo moonshot. So you bring it right up to the public. So let's see here. Are there any questions out there?
I have a question.
Okay. Who's that, Gertrude?
Yeah, sorry about the light. Dr. McClamroch, it was a fascinating presentation. Thank you. Professor Bishop already hinted at something. I wanted to ask, are there any statements from Wernher von Braun himself or the family afterwards about his, not his role, but about his work at Dora?
From what I understand, his family does not like to talk about it and does not interview often. His middle daughter is probably the most vocal of the family members. And at the 2019 anniversary, in fact, all three of their children were in town and were feted at many celebrations. And she was interviewed and asked about Michael Neufeld's autobiography of her father. And in the interview, she said she had never read the book. Wow. And did not know who he was. And she said that she felt like his criticism of the townfolk of Huntsville, which he said are in denial, was harsh. So I do think there's a polarized, groups. And I'm learning more and more about the group, so I can't say that I'm an expert. But the academic group was following more along Michael Neufeld's study, as opposed to the Space and Rocket Center, which was looking at, they consider their mission to inspire the next generation of spaceflight travelers and to highlight the industry. And they serve as very much a booster institution for the town of Huntsville and for the state of Alabama. So they're not showing or talking about the negative history that they know exists. And I do believe this is, we're watching a transition happen right now. So it's not a complete final product. And the UAH situation has calmed down tremendously. Michael Neufeld has not been back since the 2010 exhibit. And it really does seem like the dust has settled, that nobody's stirring up big issues right now. So I don't know if there will be the discovery of some statements or from von Braun about Mittelbau Dora and the concentration camp labor. I've come across a few things where he did admit that he knew about it. He admitted that he was there. And it does seem like there could even be a, I'm not quite sure what we're going to call the story. Did he repent? Is there some sort of, yeah,
exactly.
I think I may find some of that, but I don't know yet. And My new position at the Space and Rocket Center, I will be in the archive. So give me another 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll find it. I do have to do the day job first.
Yeah.
Well, we might add, Susan, that initially you actually intended to work on the Rocketeers' families, right? You wanted to see how the children, above all, like this daughter of Wernher von Braun's, wanted to maintain the elevated image of these Rocketeers.
Yeah.
Of course, that does not include the Nazi past. That's why it's such a contentious issue, right?
Yeah.
And why did you abandon that initial plan?
For a number of reasons. In studying people who are alive and interviewing them, I really would like to be in a position of trust where they really feel that they can talk to me. And I'm an unknown, you know, and to come at them with a tape machine right now, I think I would give the same spiel that they give everybody. So I don't think that would have been very productive. And observing people seems to work better than questioning them. So I'm now in position to observe. And I think this will be a long-term project, but observing in 2019 how the second generation was brought in to give talks, and they talked about their fathers, and they talked about growing up in Huntsville. And they called themselves Paperclip 2, which I think was really charming. And
well, you have
Wernher
to
von Braun's
what Paperclip 1 is.
Yeah.
Yes. There's so much I couldn't tell you in 40 minutes, but Paperclip 1 is the name of the operation, the American government operation to bring in not just the rocket scientists, but other advanced technological professionals from Germany. And also it expanded into also bringing in patents and bringing in industrial information as well. So it was a huge program, and
but of course,
it
the point
lasted.
is to bring in former Nazis, right?
Oh yes, yes. There was at first, you know, bringing in knowledge, and remember, we were still fighting Japan at the time. So the idea was that we would bring in knowledge that would help in the war effort. And then as that ended, it was to prevent the Russians from getting this knowledge. So no matter what the person's background, if we were that concerned about the Russians getting their hands on them, then we were trying to get them first. And so hence we had our Germans and their Germans, a whole nother Cold War story. And here in Huntsville, von Braun's house had a huge bomb shelter. And I really hate that it's not a museum. I think it should be, but it's in a residential neighborhood, and I understand why it's not. But the Cold War that came to Huntsville is incredible for a southern town.
Yeah.
The plantations were still standing, and the fields were still planted in cotton, and yet they were test sites.
Susan, it's also a Cold War over Huntsville's memory, right?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. The hero, once they had the nation's Cold War hero, they're very, very reluctant to let go of that imagery.
You know, I think one also would need to add that, you know, the children of the Nazis, there is cases in Germany where the children sort of go on discovery journeys and discover, you know, the deeds of their father, and then become very critical, particularly if they were involved in war crimes, like the former governor in Poland, Hans Frank. His son has sort of become the poster child of this generational conflict between, you know, the father's generation who served Hitler, and then the children's generation who want to see their crimes uncovered. But that's obviously something that's not going on in Huntsville, Alabama. But I would also like you, Susan, maybe to talk a little bit more about La Coupole. It has to be said that you did go on a trip yourself to sort of study the original sites. You went to Peenemünde, you went to Dora Mittelbau to sort of see what went on there, but then you also went to La Coupole in France. And since you mentioned it, maybe you could give us a bit more background about La Coupole.
It's an interesting site in that it was built by the Germans to launch the missiles on London, but it was never used. That they had to abandon the site. By that time, the tides had shifted against them. So the site itself was, the entrance to it was bombed off, and so it was not usable because it was determined that it could be used to launch weapons. And the citizenry opened it back up and turned it into a museum. And this also happened in Nordhausen with the Mittelbau Dora site, that it had been sealed off by bombs, and it was the local community that determined they would make a memorial and a museum out of it. For that matter, Peenemünde, it was also the local community that turned that site into a museum. So again, because my interest is public history, I wanted to see how they each treated their sites. The site in France is the only one that really carried the entire space industry to its final story. They showed Peenemünde, and they showed the beginnings of missile development and rocket development, but then they split the story and they tell the Russian side of it and the American side of it. And they have a planetarium, so it really goes more into the science. But they're also a site that has been researching the biographies of the detainees, the French detainees who were kept at Dora. And they have created biographies of 9,000 people. And it's been a huge task. It's a book, but they also, on display, they have photographs of the individuals, and they tell a bit of their life story and their background, because they do not want these people to be forgotten. It is very much like the Jewish Holocaust call to never forget, but in this case, it is a French resistance story. At Mittelbau Dora, you get more of a Holocaust feeling at that museum, even though the detainees were from all over Europe. At Peenemünde, you really do not get so much the story of the concentration camp labor as more of a story that urges you to contemplate nuclear warfare, missile warfare, and the technology that was developed there. Peenemünde presents the most Wernher von Braun story of all the sites, including Huntsville. Huntsville spends more attention now on astronauts and US technology and less on the Germans per se. But the site in Peenemünde is very much about Wernher von Braun. He was the director of missile development there at a very, very young age. So sort of a wonder kid, you know, and it's a strange site where they also play recordings of his voice, just like they do in Huntsville. And the recordings are in English because he was not recorded in Germany as a young man speaking, but they are presented in a negative light. And the summer of 2019 was crazy for me because I was in Peenemünde listening to a concert that was music and voice. And when they would present Wernher von Braun, I was sort of shocked to hear it and hear what he was saying in English turned into a negative. And then a month later, I was in Huntsville where the celebration was his voice again speaking, but this time he was the hero. And it was the inverse universe. and there's no happy middle ground right now.
When you speak of Huntsville, Susan, you mean the U.S. Space and Rocket Center that is the public history arm of the American rocket program. And you're saying that they are silencing the history of von Braun there.
I'm not sure that I would say they're silencing it. I think they've been afraid to go deeply into it. They talk more about Peenemünde, and Peenemünde is sort of safe for everyone to talk about because it's the beginning of the technology. And from my American perspective, having been in Huntsville and been to the Space and Rocket Center, when I went to Peenemünde, I almost felt like I was going to the Garden of Eden, where everything began. And it had very much that feeling to me. And I realized for German visitors, it was a place where you go in deep and dark contemplation. For the American going there, it was sort of like, ooh, this is cool. This is where it all started. And I had to temper my enthusiasm a little bit. I called it a magical place, and the director kind of reacted a little bit in shock.
But may I say that, is that not a very good example of how Germany has dealt with its past and how thoroughly it has gone into every aspect of history, whereas that's what people in America have not done yet. Isn't that an intersection of where you say this is exactly it? The German Vergangenheitsbewältigung has not occurred yet in the States, and should Americans not respond more like the Germans did and go away from the, as you called it, the Disneyfication of Wernher von Braun?
This really relates so much to my work with Confederate monuments.
Yeah.
In that almost every hearing I have participated in regarding Southern Confederate monuments, someone in the audience, some public speaker, some politician, somebody will bring up Nazi Germany and bring up how the Germans have dealt with this difficult history. And usually they'll say, you know, Germany has outlawed the swastikas, they've outlawed this and that. Why aren't we doing that in America? And then the argument of freedom of speech and so on and so forth. But as a student of Southern history and Southern culture, the lost cause was allowed to become basically a religion. And it's not over. It's very much alive and still ongoing.
Yeah.
So I watch how we've allowed a celebration of a negative for almost 200 years. It's right. A long, long time. Right. It's entrenched. And how do you get rid of the lost cause culture?
Right.
It's changing, but
right.
it's taking the cancel culture, the Black Lives Matter, it's taking
right.
Academics, so on and so forth. And then the question sometimes is, how involved should academics be in activism? Should they just be recording this history, or should they be out in the streets marching as well, you know, and protesting?
Right.
Yes, the German example has been brought up many, many times to me. And I thought, well, it seems like the swift answer, you know, just stop this. we cannot keep doing this. We've got to stop this. And German seems to be so efficient with that. But even at that, from what I'm reading, there's an undercurrent that says, you know, kind of enough is enough. Now let's mellow out a little bit.
Yeah.
So we haven't gotten that militantly angry at carrying on our own mythology.
Exactly. One last question from me. Do you think it is feasible that within the next 5 to 10 years, as you say, there will be a plaque underneath Wernher von Braun's statue that explains the rocket and the Reich. In other words, instead of taking his statue or that bust, instead of taking it down, do you think the time will come where there is a plaque describing his role in both?
Interesting question, because that particular bust is on a military base. And yeah, it's on an army base. And so, and that was the headquarters of the Marshall Space Flight Center. So that's an industry site.
Yeah.
The museum had a bust of Wernher von Braun in a case inside the museum. And from what I understand, very recently, it was taken off display. So I do want to know about that. There are no other images of him in town. I should say sculpted images. There are, there's like a stele with a plaque that tells of his history, but it's just a rock, basically, with a plaque. There's a mural in the courthouse, and he's one figure among the many founders of Huntsville type figures. So he's just a small face. There are, his name is on a few buildings and a few things. There happen to be big buildings, big things, but all in all, in the community, it's not even so much that there are visible signs, commemorations, and memorials. It's more like a pervasive knowledge that his group started this industry, which, by the way, we're in the second space age right now. And Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have facilities now in Huntsville. So, and it's just continuing to grow. The US Space Command is supposed to establish its headquarters here. So it's just known that he was part of the spark that started something big. I do expect the US Space and Rocket Center to be the facility that educates visitors to Huntsville. This is going to be difficult for them, but I think it should be part of their mission. It should be in there somewhere. Right now, there's a vignette of von Braun's office, his desk, the things on his desk and model rockets behind him and such. And it looks like, a time capsule of venerating the brilliant genius type of thing. I would love to see something near that does talk about the history that came over with him. However, there may be more to this story in between, where there was a change of attitude and where he repented, and we'll have to see how much of that story comes out. It will be difficult to tell children who come through space camp that the founder of all this was an evil guy. So I don't think they're going to be able to just put it in black and white terms like that. I think it's got to be more nuanced. But for the adults who come through, I do think that there's a feeling that there's something missing and avoiding a topic. So yes, and I do think now is the time. Within, if not 5 years, certainly within 10 years, it's got to be stated. But then again, the industry is moving on. We've got the Bezoses and the Musk and all these people that are going to be the next story.
Okay, Susan, we've done an hour, so I think that's enough. And it seems to me like you're continuing to work on this story with your new position, and hopefully you will bring that explanatory power to the Space Center. That so hopefully
you never know.
you never know. Yeah, but I mean, you're sitting right at the source right now as the registrar, so that hopefully will allow you to develop this topic further. Anyway, we'd like to thank you for spending an hour with us and for presenting your talk.
Thank you.
A wonderful opportunity. Thanks. It's great work. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, stay tuned.
I'll be in touch. Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.